If you are at the bleeding edge of classic gaming, then you've heard of MiSTer, the open source FPGA-based emulation platform based on the fundamental goal of hardware accuracy. MiSTer already has tons of cores spanning 8 to 32-bit consoles, home computers, arcade games, and more. In this series, I'll feature one FPGA core every day for the next 21 days to ring in the new year.
The Commodore 64 Family Pack is the best way I know to introduce your family to the world of the future. The Commodore 64 is the world's largest selling computer with more than 7 million units purchased worldwide and the world's largest software base for education and entertainment.
Next on my New Year's countdown, it's the Commodore 64 core. Originally by Peter Wendrick, it's been heavily modified by the MiSTer team and brought in, and it works either as a Commodore 64 as you know it, or as any number of combinations of Commodore hardware. It's basically a fully decked out Commodore 64 with all the accessories and extra drives. Has switchable dual SIDs, the 6581 and the 8580 from the 64C, with degree switching from stereo to mono. It has the OPL2 sound expander, a reduced border mode for 16:9 displays, a tape drive, cartridge support, file loading, joystick swapping, which is really important, and it can basically be the G64GS game system, which was a Commodore 64 without a keyboard, had a cartridge slot on top. So you can think of it as a game console or as a classic computer. Most people think of it as a computer, but actually in MiSTer, that cartridge support is pretty handy because it basically does away with any need to use the command line. You can use the command prompt if you want to, but actually even for file loading now, after you load a file in Jiffy DOS, it will automatically load it, so you don't even have to type in the old command prompts. Now, MiSTer has a lot of Commodore cores, actually. It has the Commodore 16 or Plus 4, the Commodore PET, the VIC-20 core, but the C64 core is by far going to be the most popular. This is the world's best-selling single computer in history, I guess, to this day. And you can see why. It was relatively inexpensive, it packed a lot of punch, you could squeeze a lot out of it. These games are actually extremely good. I would have been impressed by any one of them. There were no Commodore 64s around me growing up. I was probably 10 years too young to really be part of that movement. But I would have been happy with any of these games. There's a lot of Ocean games, a lot of games that were on consoles later, games from the arcade. The Ghostbusters game is really interesting. Some games sound better than they play, like the Batman game by Ocean that I mentioned. But then there's extremely addictive games as well, like Lode Runner you can get sucked into for hours. Jumpman, a really simple game that just really sucks you in. Space Taxi, by far my favorite game on the C64, and I would have been really happy seeing this one in an arcade. It would be a great game for a real cabinet, and you could do that with MiSTer if you wanted to. It's a great sounding game as well. Lots of voice effects, and it's just extremely arcadey. It's just such a classic golden age arcade type game, but with better graphics and more levels, I guess you would say. But there it is, a really quick look at the Commodore 64 core, a really interesting one, and remember that cartridge support makes it extremely easy to use. Even if you have no clue what you're doing with a C64, you can just load a cartridge just like any of the console cores and boot right into a game. The joystick for it only used 3 buttons, so it's really easy to map almost any controller that you have around. So what core will be next? Find out tomorrow as my countdown continues. This video represents a snapshot of the core as it exists today, but by the time you're watching this in the future, it may have been improved or expanded with new features. Hit the subscribe button to be kept up to date with all the latest MiSTer happenings, and ring the bell to be notified when I go live for a stream. If you like the channel, consider supporting it. Patreon support at any level gets you an instant invite to the SmokeMonster Elite Discord and early access to my videos. Thank you so much for your support, I really appreciate it.